Welcome to the Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton. I am Connor Williams, and I'm joined by Paul from the Everton Business Matters Podcast. Some of you may know him as the Esk. Paul, welcome.
Hi there. I think everybody knows me as the Esk these days, even my family.
So we'll start this off with me asking you about your thoughts on the whole Ancelotti saga, because it's been a mad couple of weeks for Everton fans. Just tell me, your thoughts, feelings about everything that's gone on.
Okay. I mean, clearly when it first happened, and it's just over a week ago now, but it seems like a lot longer, it was a massive shock to everybody. I don't think anybody expected it. But actually, I suppose, with the benefit of hindsight, if you start to look back at how things went, possibly there were warning signs before it happened. It didn't seem. It's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because there was so much joy when he arrived, and there was so much expectation when he arrived. But actually, I suppose if you'd just been really cold-hearted and looked at it from a non-emotive point of view, which is difficult, obviously, as a football fan, difficult as an Evertonian, you'd probably ask the question whether Carlo was the right person in the first place, given his career, given the types of clubs that he'd operated with in the past, and the types of teams in particular that he'd operated with in the past. It was obviously very different coming to Everton, but we sort of ignored that, and we thought, well, maybe he's seeking something completely different from what he's done in the past. Maybe he wants to show a different style of management to what he's shown in the past. Maybe he wants to show a different style of coaching to what he's done in the past. And at times we sort of believed that, particularly at the beginning of this season, when the season started really fantastically for us. But actually, the reality of it was none of that. He came for whatever reason. The reason might have been money. Who knows? He came, but actually, now looking back on it, I think he couldn't wait to get back to his comfort zone. And I think as this season developed, and as the situation of us having opportunities, first of all for the Champions League, then the Europa League, then sort of clinging on for the third competition, the Europa Conference League, and then failing all of that. And clearly I've gone back and listened to some of his interviews. There's a growing frustration in some of the things that he said. And Carlo's always been known as a manager that stood up for his team, always backed his team regardless of what happened. But there were a couple of occasions towards the end when you could see that he'd really he got to the end of his tether. So is it a surprise? Was it opportunistic? Certainly opportunistic in the sense that he got lucky in the sense that the Madrid job became available, I suppose, in the same way that he got lucky in coming to us when he left Napoli. But did he engineer it, or was it just circumstances? I'm not particularly sure, but clearly it didn't take a huge lot to persuade him to move back to Madrid, having experienced what he experienced at Everton.
No problem. Were you shocked by any chance that he did move to Madrid just because of his comments on the Super League, and obviously Madrid being massive instigators in it? Were you shocked when he did choose Madrid instead of just, maybe holding on for another season, to see if a bigger job comes available?
I think his comments on the Super League were comments that you'd expect any employee to make. And I think I said that on a couple of podcasts at the time. He's actually just speaking his position as a representative of Everton Football Club. I don't think for a moment that he genuinely believed what he was saying. Because had he been in the position, and to be fair to Roger Armstrong, Roger, I think, probably was the first to make this point. Had he been with one of the clubs that were proposed to be in the Super League, then he wouldn't have said the same things again. So, no, not really.
No problem. So the next one is, what do you think is the right process to go about picking the next man?
Okay, I think it's very, very important that if we have a director of football, that the director of football runs the process completely. It's believed that Marcel has already said to the board that he would welcome their input, or he would take their input on board, but actually the process belongs to him. At the end of the day, he is the football subject matter expert in the club. He's the most senior employee in the club that has any knowledge of football. So from my perspective, it's very clear the board should give him the authority to go out and do his search. Now, they may have a discussion about what type of manager they want, because they may have a discussion around what their next objectives are going to be, because clearly with Carlo not being here any longer, the objectives are probably going to change. So the objective this year was European football. Okay, we failed to get that. But had Carlo stayed, the objective for next year would have been very clearly European football. Is that the case with the new manager? I suppose it depends on who the new manager is. And it might be that Brands takes the view that actually just getting somebody that's going to get us near to qualification for Europe, or get us qualification for Europe. So they're taking the Carlo approach, where you buy older players that are sort of, to use Boris Johnson's phrase, sort of oven ready, isn't perhaps the wisest strategy. It was okay to do like last year and for 6 months of the previous season, but actually it doesn't fit into, if I'm Marcel Brands, it doesn't fit into my idea of creating a sustainable club. So it might be that actually we need to take it. Marcel thinks that we need to take a little step back, and we need to bring somebody in that actually is going to grow the club over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however long he thinks it will take. But that decision, having had a discussion over what the strategy for the club should be with the board, and having agreed a strategy, i.e., are we going to go short term and look for somebody that's going to get us in the Champions League, high risk, or are we going to go slightly longer term, look for somebody that can come in, develop young players, buy players, improve those players, etc. That may not mean European football for the season after next, but actually in 2 or 3 years' time, the club will be in a much better position, because it will have a younger squad, a squad that has higher residual value.
No problem.
Whatever decision they've made, they have to leave Marcel then to make the selection based on what that strategy is.
No problem. Out of curiosity, which one would you go for? Would you go for somebody who could potentially get us Europe next season, or would you go for somebody who, it might take them a while, but they're going to build up the team as they go?
I don't think we can afford to go down the sort of the Hollywood approach again, which clearly Mashiri might, say clearly, one assumes that Mashiri would like to continue that process, although in the 5.5 years that he's been here, having tried it at least twice, it's failed. I don't think we can do it. I don't think we can do it for a number of reasons. One, it's not sustainable long term. Two, I don't think we have the money to do it, because anybody that comes in sort of like on a Hollywood ticket is going to want to bring in lots of his own players, and we're just not in a position to do that. And I know people will say, yeah, well, Mashiri will just throw cash at it, and FFP, or profitability and sustainability, no longer applies. Yeah, that could happen, but I don't really see it happening. I don't see it happening if we're going to build a stadium, because nobody in the history of football has continued to spend huge sums of money on a playing squad at the same time as building a brand new stadium. You can go back on an awful long way. If you're putting a lot of resource into the stadium, you just can't. It doesn't matter how wealthy Mashiri is, and Mashiri has already pumped in a large amount of his wealth on a relative basis into the club, largely because of the many mistakes that he's made. I just can't see it happening. So this is possibly not the answer that a lot of Evertonians will want to hear, but the sort of more sustainable model, I think, has to happen for the long-term benefit of the club. We've got to get to a point where, we're operating in normal circumstances, not just throwing money at stuff.
No problem. So obviously we mentioned the board a little bit, and obviously Ancelotti leaving. What do you think the board's response was to? Do you think they were as shocked as the fans, or do you think they probably saw this coming?
I think the board would have been very shocked. I think it would have been an enormous wake-up call to them, because there is this belief, which certainly evidenced by Bill Kenwright's comments at the last AGM in January, that we're revered, that the board we've got a very good board full of talented people, and as a club, we're a club that a lot of people look to for solutions. So that sort of gives me an indication. And if you read some of Denise's words in her letter to fans before the final game of the season, there's this belief that we're actually doing quite well as a club, when the reality is that we're not. So if the board is sitting around thinking we've got Carlo Ancelotti as our manager, that therefore, that puts us in a high position, and we're doing well to have him. And then he picks up the phone, no doubt to Farhad in the first instance, and says, "Sorry, I'm leaving." That will come as an enormous reality check, because it's so difficult for them to move on from where they are. I don't think it can be understated the damage that Ancelotti's decision has made in the short term to the positioning of the club.
No problem. I was going to say, you mentioned it. There were rumours apparently that Moshiri wanted Ancelotti for quite a while, so that must have come as quite a painful to finally get his man, and then after a season and a half, his man to leave. Obviously, we've mentioned the board quite a bit, and you've said there's a good board there.
I didn't say there's a good board there.
Denise, had hinted at it. I want to talk about the personalities on the board, because obviously you've got Marcel Brands, you've got Denise, you've got Kenwright, and you've got Moshiri. I want to get your thoughts on the different personalities and how they mix, especially with looking at managers. I know rumours have come out that Moshiri, Kenwright, and Brands all have separate ideas for who they want to go for as managers. Obviously, I know it's paper talk, but if you could just give me your insight on that.
Sure. I mean, Moshiri's not on the board, first of all. So he's the major shareholder. So in a sense, the way it works, or the way that it should work, is as the major shareholder, the chairman reports to the major shareholder, and the chairman reports on the decisions that the board have made. So there's 4 people on the board, as you know. There's Denise, there's Bill, there's Marcel Brands, and there's Sasha Ryzanstev, the finance guy. So I would assume that whilst Sasha, for example, will have a view as an individual as to who our next manager would be, given his lack of footballing experience, he shouldn't be really part of that process. So I would sort of, in a sense, without being disrespectful to him, discount what contribution he could make. I'd probably say the same. Well, I'd certainly say the same of Denise, and I'd actually say the same of Bill as well. There is only one person that sits on the board that's qualified to make a decision. There's only that one person, and I include Moshiri on that. I think Moshiri's actions in the last 5.5 years have proved that he's not qualified neither. I understand from people that have met him that he's an absolute footballing nut, and I guess if you got into a footballing conversation with him, he would sound as if he knows a great deal about the game. But evidenced by some of the decisions that he's made in terms of the managers that he's brought in the last 5.5 years, and some of the players that he's brought in, because he has been actively involved in player recruitment. You have to question, if it's possible to question his judgment, you have to question it. As I say, without, I can't overemphasize the point enough. It has to be down to Marcel Brands.
No problem. So obviously, my next one was going to be who do you think it should solely lie on? But you just answered Marcel Brands. Do you think this is a matter of learning from previous mistakes, though? Because as you mentioned, with Mashiri and former managers he's appointed and players, do you think this is a matter of the board, like of Mashiri now learning from previous mistakes and putting his faith in Marcel Brands?
I think if Mashiri isn't happy with whatever strategy Brands comes up with from a footballing point of view, then he has to make a decision as to whether Brands is the right director of football for him. Now, given that Brands has very recently signed a brand new 3-year contract, his contract was due to expire at the end of this month. You'd have to believe that Mashiri values Brands' judgment and values Brands' strategy, because otherwise, why is he offered a new contract? If that is the case, then Mashiri should have the discipline to keep out of footballing matters. And if he doesn't have the discipline to keep out of footballing matters, I think Brands has to say to him, look, you employ me, you spend a lot of money on employing me, you employ me for my expertise in this subject. Leave it to me. The worst thing in the world, if you're at the top of an organization and you're an expert in something, is to have. It's okay to have your decisions and your thought processes, etc., questioned, but to have somebody then with less experience, less knowledge, overriding those decisions. So I think it's really, really important that Mashiri recognises that if we're going to move forward as a football club, barring just a piece of good luck, if we're going to move forward as a football club, that responsibility sits very firmly with Marcel Brands, and we sink or swim on the back of what he's able to do.
No problem. So what do you think would be the best thing for the club to do right now in their current situation moving forward? What would your next steps be?
Well, clearly they're talking to an awful, well, I say clearly, I assume that they're talking to an awful lot of prospects in terms of who the managers will be. They'll probably have a list of people that they want to talk to. Maybe, I don't know how many would be on that, half a dozen, say 10 people perhaps. They'll have a number of people that have contacted the club, because when there's a management vacancy, an awful lot of people write to clubs saying, I'm suitably qualified. So no doubt they'll go through that list, and there may be one or two people have the sort of the requisite skills and experience that they hadn't thought of previously. So what the club should be doing is drawing up perhaps a short list of maybe a dozen candidates, and then leaving Marcel to go through those candidates, background checks, knowing he should know quite a bit about most of them anyway, but going through them with a fine-tooth comb, interviewing perhaps the 6 out of the 12 that he really, really likes, and then putting a recommendation to the board that then goes to Mashiri. And the board should do 2 things, I think. First of all, they should have communicated something by now with the fans, even if it's just like a holding statement, either from Bill or from Denise Barrett-Baxendale as the CEO. Just putting the club's position straight, just so that there's something that there's an acknowledgement that the fans are out there wondering what's going on, even if it doesn't contain much, just an acknowledgement of that. And then secondly, they have to take whatever recommendation Brands puts to them, that they're almost duty bound just to take that recommendation. And if they're not happy with the recommendation, then either they're wrong and shouldn't be there, or Brands is wrong and shouldn't be there. But in reality, what they should be doing is just letting Brands go through this process, which might take 3 or 4 weeks, possibly, maybe less, if he finds the right person, and just go with it and put that recommendation to Mashiri, because at the end of the day, Mashiri is going to be the one that signs off on whatever recommendation Brands makes.
No problem. So obviously, my next question was going to be about who do you ideally go for if you're Everton? Do you go for somebody who brings their own style in, or do you try and find the manager that's more pragmatic, best suited for the players we have at the current club? I was just wondering, would you go for somebody, maybe plays a bit more of an exciting style of play, or would you get somebody who, quite good at working with what they've got?
I think we have to find somebody that's got an identifiable style of football, whether that's sort of like Potter, for example, or whether it's sort of more defensive, like Nuno. Does it matter what the style is? Not really. But I think what we're looking for is somebody that's got an identifiable style of football, somebody that's known to be able to take a group of players that are already at a club and improve them, and somebody that can, bring in young players and make the club attractive to young players. I think one of the key points about Carlo being here, it was clearly not a club that would have attracted many young players had Carlo stayed, because there's no great evidence of Carlo giving young players a chance, either from the academy or people that have been brought in. So we would, I think, in an ideal situation, a manager that is recognised as giving younger players an early opportunity to do their stuff.
No problem. So we mentioned styles and managers. Do you think Everton have a certain style? It's just I was speaking to a couple of the lads the other day when I was filming a video, and we were saying that Everton used to be 4-4-2, aggressive, a lot of crossing the ball in. Do you think that is our style still anymore? And do you think we should try and get somebody who would bring that type of style in, try and rile up the fans?
It's difficult to see how we can do that with the current squad of players. In a sense, yeah, it would be great to go back to those days, not sort of quite the dogs of war, but an aggressive sort of pressing style of football. I mean, we played pressing football before pressing became sort of like a popular term. I just think we've got to be really pragmatic and not necessarily have a defined view until we know who the actual manager is going to be, and then it's a question of what style best suits that manager, and can that manager get that style of play out of the existing squad and anybody that we can bring in, because our finances are not great, so the chances of bringing in a lot of people are limited because A, we don't have a huge amount of money, and B, we are going to find it difficult still to get rid of people whose contracts haven't expired yet. So I think we have to be just entirely pragmatic. I don't think we can sort of go down a prescribed route. It really depends on who the individual is that Marcel Brands is most comfortable about, both in terms of the current squad, but also in terms of who we're likely to be able to bring in into the squad. So again, it's really a point for Brands to take a view and to act on it.
No problem. So obviously you mentioned finances, you mentioned with the new stadium as well, it's, not many teams tend to spend big when they're building a stadium. Do you think if we got Champions League or at least European football in some capacity, that would have do you think that'd still be the case where, we've got to be a bit more careful, or do you think it would have gave room for more spending?
Well, had we got a Europa League place, and we would have qualified for the group stages of Europa League, probably would have earned at least a minimum extra £20 million next year. Now, in the context of building a £500 million stadium, that doesn't sound like an awful lot, but that would have met the interest costs, for example, on the loan for the stadium. Obviously, if we'd got Champions League, then you're talking of anything for sort of from 35 to 70 to 100 million, depending upon how far, maybe wishful thinking that we could get to the final of the Champions League in our first season. But it would have been significantly more revenue. And it's not just revenue from TV; it's increased revenue from existing sponsors. So within the sponsor contract, sponsorship and commercial contracts that we have, there's obviously additional payments made if we qualify for European football. So we've missed out on at least £20 million worth of revenue this year. And, if again, it means that we're, another couple of years off European football for the reasons I expressed earlier, then you can see that, maybe 40, maybe £60 million reduction in revenue in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. And that's significant for Everton. It is very significant.
No problem. So how long do you think afterwards we'd have to be, I'm going to say the word slightly tight with money. How long do you see that going on?
Gosh, one of the, if you're tight for money and you want to redevelop your squad, of course, one of the ways of getting around that is you sell some of your better players. So I think Moise Kean is almost certain to go, although PSG are very smartly asking for an additional year's loan rather than stumping up sort of 40-45 million pound for him. But in an ideal world, we keep Moise Kean, but in the second best option is to sell him, and that would give us money for transfer activity this summer. But looking further ahead, if we're not going to qualify for Europe, if the demands on building a stadium are such, then you're looking at selling some other players that you probably wouldn't want to sell. So, like for example, Richarlison is the next obvious candidate. But then, where is he going to go? Would we want to sell him to another Premier League club, who are probably the only ones that could afford him? Of course, Real Madrid might want him, given where Carlo is now. But yeah, that is the other option at the end of the day. You sell some of your better players, and clubs have done it successfully for years and years and years, and you reinvest that money in younger players, which is a viable strategy.
No problem. So obviously we're on about selling. I'll mention buying now. Marcel Brands is apparently rumoured to be going in for Dumfries and a couple of other players before we've announced the manager. And I've seen a couple of people online say, how's this possible? But do you think this is the right move? He is the director of football at the end of the day. Do you think it's right that he's the one going out making signings?
Well, I think if he's definitely the person that's going to choose the manager, then the signings that he's looking at are probably signings that would fit in with the person that he thought was the ideal candidate for the manager's position. So I don't see a problem with that, because there's obviously some consistency in that, and he's probably taking the view that whatever player he's looking at to acquire will fit the manager that he's looking to acquire as well. Now, if the management decision is made by somebody else, then clearly that then becomes a problem. But no, this is the right way of doing it. The whole idea about having a director of football is that the director of football runs the football strategy, and therefore is the consistent. It provides consistency over a long period of time. So it really shouldn't make any difference if there's a change of manager, because as I say, you would assume that whoever the manager that's coming in, that's going to be a manager that actually fits the type of players that Brands is buying.
No problem. I did read earlier on in the week, and we did report it on the channel, that Brands was looking to get deals done, preferably before the Euros start, which, bearing in mind it's Wednesday now, looks slightly unlikely, but not impossible. But he says it was to stop, competition. Do you think this is the right move? And I just want your opinion on, international football tournaments in the summer and the effect that can have on transfer targets.
It clearly has a big effect on transfer targets, because if there's a player out there that is playing for one of the teams in any of the international competitions that are taking place and has a good competition as you would hope them to do, then it brings greater competition to acquiring that player after the international competition. So in an ideal world, yes, you'd want to buy beforehand, but the sellers of these players, they're fully aware that their position strengthens if that player goes and has a good international tournament. So I would be amazed if we did any business that before Friday of this week. Absolutely amazed.
Yeah, I think the same, especially as the week goes on. Well, I wanted to get your idea on who you think might be the ideal candidate to take over the hot seat at Goodison Park. Then,
well, given I said it's Marcel Brand's job, not mine. I'm surprised there hasn't been more talk about Frank Lampard. To be honest, he's a bright, intelligent young man. He's well recognised throughout the game. He's got great experience of winning things. He's had a fantastic career. People point to him losing the Chelsea job. I think if he'd have done what he did at Chelsea anywhere else, he'd still be in that job. Chelsea is just a different club from everybody else. So I'm a little surprised that there hasn't been more talk about him. Of the likely candidates that are available, I would have gone for him. Now I know there's a lot of talk about this guy Galtier, who I have to say I didn't know anything at all about before his name came up in the last couple of days. So I don't really feel qualified to talk about him. But just by reading what I've read, clearly he ticks a number of boxes. Successful and has a track record of developing players, and is recognised as being a very good manager of young players. So it would seem that he would fit the bill. The rest of the candidates that are in the public domain and the ones that the newspapers are talking about don't fill me with any excitement at all. I totally dismiss the idea of it being a Martinez or being a Moyes or being a Rafa Benitez. I just their days of, well, in the case of Martinez and Moyes, their days have gone at Goodison, and they're not coming back. And I don't think Rafa's the right guy, although clearly he was a very good manager in his day. So, and then the rest of the candidates, it's just doesn't do much for me. But if Brands picks them, he's going to pick them for good reasons. And I think if somebody comes in that's not an obvious, people go, wow, great, we've got him. Then one of the things the club has to do, one of the things that Brands has to do in particular, is explain the reasons for bringing him in. So if for example, it was Graham Potter, I'm not saying it is, but I'm just saying if, for example, it was, I think there has to be a very clear explanation as to what attracted Brands to him and what Brands now expects from him. So actually, thinking about it, that has to happen, whoever comes in. I think there has to be more communication with the fans and say, the reason why we brought this guy in is whatever the reasons are. And this is our strategy going forward. This is our plan going forward. We have to, the club have to communicate more with the fans, whoever it is that we're next bringing in.
Not a problem. I want to get your opinion on it. It's just my last question.
Sure.
It's about Nuno, that obviously looks set to go to Palace, but now that looks to be down. And it seems to be a similar story with when he had talks with us about backroom staff. And I just want to get your opinion on this idea that he was going to, overhaul our backroom staff, and just how much it would cost the club, if anything, to get rid of the people we already have, apply, more money to new contracts.
I think it's an interesting one, and apparently he has a very large backroom staff. But I think it was also the fact that he had one of the conditions of him coming to a new club was that he wanted to bring some of the Wolves players with him. There were 2 or 3 Wolves players at least that he wanted to bring with him. And of course, there's also the slightly complex relationship that he has with Mendes, the agent. And I don't know how that fits in with Brand's view of things, or indeed when it comes to agents, how that fits in with Mashiri's view of things. So it seems that Nuno is a guy that comes with a lot of conditions and some costs. I doubt the costs are the issue, to be honest. I think the issue will be what are the conditions that Nuno applies. So be it a number of Wolves players, 2 or 3 Wolves players, perhaps, some of whom we might quite like, but nevertheless, him making those conditions of coming in, and then looking forward, the relationship with Mendes, what that means to Everton and what it means to Everton's current and existing relationships with agents. So Nuno's a slightly complex one, I think, and I'm not surprised that the club couldn't necessarily accommodate those conditions.
That's absolutely brilliant. That was my last question. I'd just like to say thank you for being on the channel. Everybody who's watching it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends on Twitter. Don't forget to follow me, Paul, and the Toffee Blues on Twitter. Our descriptions will be in the bio below. Thank you very much.